It is time for another edition of the Sports Wrap with Michael Kravetz. I'm Michael Kravetz. Wanted to try off something new there for today's show. And in today's episode, we'll be talking about the Steelers' huge victory over the Cincinnati Bengals, Pitt's their win over Buffalo, and I'm gonna comment a little bit on the NHL lockout. But of course, we're gonna start off today's show with the Pittsburgh Steelers and their huge victory over the Cincinnati Bengals. And in this game, they win it 24-17. And the first half, they played pretty bad. They ended up tying it at halftime, and then the second half was dominated by the Steelers. The Bengals only end up getting 105 total yards in the second half. They had 185 total yards for the entire game. And quite simply, if you have less than 200 yards in a game, you're not going to win. And of course, Cincinnati lost. The offense played extremely well again. Ben was very efficient. He spread the ball around. Antonio Brown had 7 catches for 96 yards. Mike Wallace had 8 catches, but only for 52 yards. And there were a lot of drops from him in this game, and a lot of easy touchdowns that he could have had. A couple, actually, but he ends up dropping them. You know, that's him being trying to be too perfect, over perfect. So I'm not going to blame him. Obviously, it's a contract year. You don't want to be doing that, but I think he'll get himself ready and back on pace to have some of those big yards, those big 100-yard games. And of course, Heath Miller was the go-to guy for Ben on third down. Miller just ends up catching the ball no matter what situation. No matter who's covering him, he's going to end up with the ball. So that's something that I really think will work for the Steelers' advantage toward the end of this year. And Ben has not been asked to do a lot. He called the offense a dink and dunk type offense. And really, he hasn't thrown the ball deep that much. Only 8 times has he thrown the ball deep. And more than 20 yards. So if they can just get the big play rolling, the bomb plays that they maybe could try at least 3 to 4 times a game and have them work, this offense could be one of the most explosive offenses in the NFL. And with Sanders chipping in and Cautry chipping in with their few catches per game, I was susceptible on if they were going to get more receivers to be on this team because they only have 4, but hey, it's working for them so far. And the other part of the offense that I would like to talk about, the running game. Jonathan Dwyer was asked to start this game because of injuries due to Rashard Mendenhall and Isaac Redman. And this is Dwyer's first start. He saw limited action last year. In the one game, though, that he was in, he ended up getting over 100 yards, 107 yards to be exact. And in the games that he played this year, nothing too flashy. He had a huge fumble in the Oakland game, which maybe cost the Steelers the game, cost them a long possession. So Tomlin benched him the following 2 games. But Dwyer stepped it up. I mean, he only had 9 carries through the first 3 quarters. So in that whole fourth quarter, he was able to carry the load. And if you're fresh, you're going to do damage. And he had quite possibly the best game of his career, short-lived career. 17 carries, 122 yards. The third down run that clinched the game, it was a 32-yard run. So, and I'm not going to lie, when I watched the game, he kind of reminded me of Jerome Bettis a little bit. And I know that's, of course, you can't compare him to Jerome Bettis, but it looked like him because, you know, he is that bigger back, and he has some wheels, though, just like the bus did. He's pretty fast once he gets out into the open field. And I was also surprised with Chris Rainey. They kept giving him the ball 3 carries, and I just kept thinking to myself, why do they keep running with Chris Rainey? Because I don't think he's that good of a back to be a running back with strict running plays up the middle. Maybe sweeps, and obviously with passing-wise, but just to run it like a straight draw or a counter up the middle, I don't think Rainey's that type of back because he's so small, but hey, I was proved wrong because he ends up getting the winning touchdown, an 11-yard touchdown run. So they use him sparingly. He can do damage, but to use him to, like to carry the ball 10 times a game, it's not the way. That's not what they're using him for. And now I'd also like to talk about the defensive side of the ball. And the Steelers had the lead in the fourth quarter, 24-17. And they had chances to pile onto the lead, but they weren't able to capitalize on them. So the defense was asked to stop Cincinnati, and they finally did. 3 drives in the fourth quarter, Cincinnati was stalled. So the defense stepped it up. They held on to the lead in the fourth quarter, and I think that's going to give them lots of momentum moving forward, especially in this AFC North division. And I was most impressed with Ike Taylor because he allowed 1 catch by A.J. Green. Granted, it was an 8-yard touchdown catch, but that was the only catch that he had the entire game. And there was another play where Green was targeted in the end zone, and Keenan Lewis was actually there with Taylor, and Keenan Lewis was in front of him to deflect the ball. So Keenan Lewis has been playing extremely well too. So hopefully these 2 corners can build off of that. And I know Ike Taylor will because he's struggled the past 6 games. So I think this is going to get him back in the right frame of mind for him to say, okay, I'm definitely covering these number 1 receivers. So I got to bring my A game every single time. And I think he will continue to do that the rest of the year. Granted, this may be his last good year, but I think he's not going to go out, playing like an old man, screwing up every single game. The first half, though, I was very concerned. The Steelers were down 7-3. They let Cincinnati go down on their first drive, an 80-yard drive, and score a touchdown. The defensive line looked horrible. Ben Jarvis, Green Ellis was running all over him. He was getting pushed. It seemed like Cameron Hayward, Ziggy Hood, they were getting pushed back. Casey Hampton were getting pushed back. And personally, I didn't feel like, okay, this was going to be a game where they were going to be in it at the end. I thought they probably had a good chance of losing. But all a team needs is one play to change things. And when it was 14-3, when it was 14-3, Andy Dalton went back to pass, and the ball hit off his offensive lineman's helmet, and it landed right into Lamar Woodley's arms. And he took the ball to Cincinnati territory, and the Steelers ended up getting a field goal on that drive. And then later on, they score a touchdown. To tie the game, and they end up getting that with a 2-point conversion on a fade route that Ben threw to Miller, which I thought was risky, but Miller came down with it, like he always does in the red zone. But the early turnovers that the Steelers had, they were critical in the sense that they dug themselves a hole. There was a play early where Ben threw a backwards pass to Antonio Brown, and then Brown ran around to the left side and threw it to Baron Batch, who was wide open. This would have been a magnificent play, but Batch just dropped the ball. He must have lost it in the lights. And then the next couple plays after, Ben forced it in pretty much to Miller. There were 2 Bengals defenders covering him, and he ends up throwing the pick. And then after Cincinnati goes 3 and out, Ben then fumbles the ball, and Cincinnati gets it, and then they convert on the touchdown. So those turnovers were alarming, but they weren't crucial in the fact that the Steelers would end up winning the game. One of the alarming signs as well was the fact on special teams, 4 times during punt or kickoff returns, they were flagged for holding. It seems like whenever you expect a good return, you think, oh no, there's going to be a flag. And obviously the move to fire Al Everest, the special teams coach, I don't know now. Maybe that's looking like that was a bad decision because their special teams right now is the weak link so far. Because it seems like they're getting flagged so many times. I mean, this is one of the first years in a long time that I can remember where Steelers are one of the top penalized teams in the National Football League. But this win, and I was a little surprised. A lot of the analysts, on ESPN, NFL Network, and even some of the local analysts here, local reporters, journalists, they didn't seem to put a lot of stock in this win, and I don't know why, because this was a division game, and I know Cincinnati had a 2-game losing streak, but they're not a bad team. They're not a good team either. They're an average team. But to go on the road where the Steelers were 0-3 so far and to get a win against one of your division rivals, I think that's huge. And now they're one game back in the loss column from Baltimore. Baltimore and Cincinnati both have their bye this week coming up. So if the Steelers can win, they're a game back from Baltimore. They still have both games to play with them. So I thought this win was really huge. It is going to change the way the season plays out for the Steelers. They're definitely going to be over 500. And I think they're definitely going to get in the playoffs based off this performance. Because they were able to beat the Bengals with a bunch of backups, essentially. Pouncey was out. Gilbert was out. Mendenhall, Redmond, Polamalu were all out. You had Mike Adams making his first career start at right tackle. And you had Doug Legursky who fills in for Pouncey. And you had Will Allen and Ryan Mundy taking Polamalu's spot. And then you had Dwyer filling in at the running back spot. And if they're able to win games with those players, once they get everyone back healthy, they're going to be that much more of a dangerous team, I think. Now, moving forward to next Sunday's game, back here at Heinz Field, I believe the Steelers are going to be wearing their throwback uniforms, which are hideous. They got the Washington Redskins, who are coming off a tough loss in New York against the Giants. RG3, I think, is going to prove to be difficult for the Steelers' defense to handle because the way he runs and passes, I don't think they've seen that in a long time. Obviously, with Vic, when he was younger, and he had a lot of good games against them when he was younger with the Falcons. But it's going to be, will they be able to keep him inside the pocket? Because I don't think RG3 is that good of a pocket passer. I think he's good outside of the pocket and, of course, running the ball. He's super dangerous. And it'll be interesting because the Steelers have not allowed a quarterback to rush for over 100 yards since 1966. And obviously RG3 has had rushed for over 100 yards already in a game this year. So it'll be a tough testament for this defense. So hopefully Harrison, Woodley, and the defensive line will be able to step up to this challenge. And obviously rookie quarterbacks do not beat Dick LeBeau that much. The only one being Troy Smith, and that was in a game that didn't matter at the end of the year. So I think that's going to be something interesting to keep your eye on too, if RG3 will be able to handle the Steelers' defense. And another question for next week is, will Jonathan Dwyer start, even if Mendenhall and Redmond are healthy? Personally, I think Baron Batch should not dress for a game, because I don't think they should keep 5 running backs on the roster unless you're going to use Batch for special teams. And I'm not saying it because of his drop. I'm just saying I think he's the least productive so far of all the running backs. And personally, I would give Dwyer the start. And obviously, if he keeps performing well like he has been, you make him the starter, because it would be between him and Mendenhall if they're both healthy. Well, if Mendenhall's healthy. In Redmond, I see a possible third down back, possible screen option guy, and maybe throw him in a little bit of fullback too eventually. But I mean, why not ride the hot hand? And right now, Dwyer is proving that he can handle being a starter, or at least for a game in the NFL. And I mean, the Cincinnati's defensive line is one of the best in the league. They're not a pushover with Pecco and Dunlap and Geathers. They have a good defensive line. So, and I think Washington's is not as good as Cincinnati. So, I think Dwyer would have even a more productive game than the one he had against Cincinnati. So, I do expect Dwyer to start, and I do expect the Steelers to beat the Redskins. I don't have my score prediction just yet, but I do expect them to beat the Redskins. I expect them to go 4-3, and leading up, they got the Redskins at home, away in New York at the Giants, Monday nighter home against Kansas City, and then a big Sunday night game at Heinz Field against the Ravens. So these next 4 games will be extremely important, and if the Steelers can go 3-1 in these next 4, I think they'll be in good shape. Well, now let's move to the Pitt Panthers. And they played at Buffalo on Saturday. Wasn't able to see the full game, just caught some of it. The crowd, I mean, geez, the crowd in Buffalo was just putrid. It was really sad just to see that there weren't that many people there. And I mean, why would there be? Pitt was 2-4, Buffalo was 1-5. 2 bad teams, essentially. And, you know, Pitt got the win. They beat Buffalo 20-6. The defense played a good game. Tino Sunseri also had a good game. Once again, he keeps proving that he is efficient, and with the tandem of receivers with Street and Shanahan, I just think that this team, they're able to, I guess you could say they're able to handle themselves with the passing side of the ball. Now, with the running game, they ran the ball. Ray Graham had 20 carries for 74 yards. They consistently kept running the ball, even though they weren't really getting many yards, especially at a Graham and Shell. So it comes to the point where if you're going to keep running the ball consistently and you're not getting enough runs or not enough yards, then obviously go to the passing game. But the weather conditions were bad in Buffalo. I understand that. They only passed 17 times, but it still shouldn't matter. I mean, Cesare was only 9 of 17 for 128 yards, so I mean, I guess you don't want to ask him to do too much because he usually makes mistakes if you do that. But I also like to say their defense, even though Buffalo doesn't have, a high-powered offense, of course, the defense played extremely well, holding them to 2 field goals. And Jason Hendricks had another interception. He leads the Big East with 4 interceptions. That led to a touchdown. So I think the defense is primed to, help this team further in the year. And they have to go 3-2 to be bowl eligible. They're 3-4 right now. And they have Temple coming up at Heinz Field. I think a very winnable game for Pitt. I think they should win. Then they have at Notre Dame, which in all likelihood it'd be a miracle for them to win at Notre Dame. Then they have Connecticut on the road. I believe home against South Florida, or at South Florida, and home against Rutgers. So, in all likelihood, yeah, they should go 3-2, losing to Rutgers and Notre Dame. But I think they have the possibility of upsetting Rutgers since it is at home. They seem to play a lot better at Heinz Field. The only problem is the running game has to play on a consistent basis. Many times I've been saying, okay, they have the best running backs in the country with Bennett as their 3, Shell and Graham splitting the top duty, but they're just not getting enough consistent yardage behind both backs. So I think in this Temple game, they have to establish that the running game is going to be their primary weapon on offense. So they just got to come out and run the ball effectively. And with Sunseri in the passing game, as long as they limit his number of passes, don't make him pass the ball more than 25 times at least, he'll be efficient. He's not going to make any mistakes. So that's what they have to have a good balance between the two. And I also now wanted to mention something on the NHL lockout. Donald Fair had 3 proposals, and one was, 50-50. But the owners weren't. He didn't even know much about his own proposal, and the owners weren't ready to look at it. So no deal still has been made. Gary Bettman said that if they can get a deal signed to have the game started by November 2nd, they can still have an 82-game season. It's just they would have to pack in some games and then add an extra week onto the season. So no talks are scheduled, and all the games are canceled through November 1st. And it's all likelihood that if they don't get a deal done by, say, this Thursday, then they're probably not going to be starting the games November 2nd. There won't be an 82-game schedule. None of the players really are optimistic that much. I'm starting to doubt now whether we're going to have hockey at all. Obviously, if they don't get this season started in time for the Winter Classic, there's no way there's going to be a season because that is a huge amount of revenue for the NHL. And if they don't play that game, then they're pretty much screwed. And I don't think the NHL is going to happen this year. But anyway, that'll do it, though, for today's show. Next week, I'll be talking about the Steelers game against the Redskins, Pitt's game against Temple. Talk a little bit about Pitt's exhibition game with IUP, men's basketball. and any more news on the NHL lockout. And the Pirates show, review show, will be coming up. The season in review will be sometime in November, middle of November, and that'll be something I'll be looking forward to. So, you just listened to the Sports Wrap. I am Michael Kravetz.